resilience.
So I hear you saying something very powerful. Your research talks about the importance of stories in promoting emotional resilience in children, but you're also saying that stories play an essential role in sustaining our families and nurturing our families, and that the grandparents, the grandmothers, play a core role in that.
Yes, the sense of continuity that comes with the story is really important in the establishment of resilience, because continuity means there's a connection between what's happening now and what happened years ago, and that means there's a connection between what's happening now and what's going to happen.
Got it.
If there's a continuity, that means that what happened in the past is likely to happen again. And so if something bad is happening now, I know that in my family's story there were bad things, but then there have been mostly good things, and now here's a bad thing, but I can probably bet there's going to be a good thing.
Right.
And so this notion that we found is something that we called an oscillating family narrative. The idea that good things happen in families and bad things happen in families, and if kids know about all of those things, as the rabbi said, we won't be destroyed. We weren't destroyed before. We won't be destroyed again.
Yeah.
That's the narrative, and that's the Jewish narrative.
Right.
It's a very long one, but that's what builds the resilience. You have to tell the story, build the narrative, but the narrative maintains the resilience.
Huh.
So, Ron, among your more recent efforts has been in the area of relational Judaism.
Yeah.
And the importance of relational Judaism in advancing our community. So you wrote a book, Relational Judaism, Using the Power of Relationships to Transform the Jewish Community. And in that book you wrote, our starting point is an amalgam of two of the fundamental and most beloved activities that define the Jewish experience: telling stories and asking questions. Building relationships begin by engaging in conversation and sharing our stories. Can you talk about that a bit?
Well, let's talk about what it means for grandparents. I would reverse it. In other words, I think we ought to be encouraging, and I think it's natural, that grandchildren ask questions. So they're built for asking questions. Why do you do this, Zadie? Why do you do this, Bubby, Grandma, Gramsy? Whatever you're called. The kids are natural question askers, as are most of us who are in the Jewish persuasion. Then I think it's our job to tell the stories that illustrate the answers to the questions. So, for example, I was in a home where a grandchild asked the grandmother, "Why do you do this, Grandma, around the Shabbat candles?" And it reminded me of my own grandmother. I should give you a Bubby story as well as a Zadie story. So my Bubby brought with her from Russia her Jewish traditions. And one of them was lighting Shabbat candles. So she would go all by herself. All these grandchildren are running around and aunts and uncles. And she'd go all by herself in those days to the dining room where her table was set. But next to the table was a break front. Remember what a break front was? It was like this big piece of furniture with her china and silver and stuff. On it was her candelabrum for Shabbat candles. So I would watch this as a little boy. I'd be fascinated. She put up the candles. She put a little scarf on her head, which is the female equivalent of a kippah. It was called what did you call it? A tichel. And then she'd stand up, and she'd light the candles. Is that okay if I can stand? Okay. And then she did what to me is like a 6-year-old boy, the strangest thing, most mysterious thing I'd ever seen. She went like this 3 times around the candles, and she'd end up like this, blocking her side of the candles. She'd start a little aerobics, a little shuckling, and she would be saying the blessing under her breath, L'ad like Ner Shel Shabbos. And then what seemed like forever was just a minute or two. She kept going, and I never knew what was happening under these hands. But when she stopped, finally, she opened her eyes, she gazed at the candles, and every single Friday night I saw her do this, There were tears streaming down her face. A little boy, a little grandson, I had no idea why she was crying till much later. She was crying because she didn't go to the synagogue. But this was her private moment with God. This is to ask for the blessings of God for her family and for her friends and her community. And then, this is the most important part of the story, she would go from all this ritual that was all by herself, she'd run into the living room where the grandchildren were running around. She'd grab the first one she could get her hands on. Often it was me. And she'd plant another big, wet, scratchy kiss. Hers was scratchy because she had a mole with a little hair sticking up right here. And she would say, "Good Shabbos, Tatale. Good Shabbos, Tatale." Now, my friend Harlene Appelman is one of the great Jewish family educators in the world, and I would share these stories, and I'd say, that's the moment I learned that it's not just about the blessings, it's about the blessings and the kisses. So I'll never forget my grandmother's kiss. And now today, when I teach, and people wonder what she was doing with this. I mean, I was like, one more minute? I saw a woman light candles, and she would like this, like a chicken. She was going, I wrote, my first book was a 260-page book about Shabbat dinners and ritual, and I never heard anybody going, when she did this 3 times around the cat. So finally, I went up to her. She grew up in a traditional home. I said, listen, tell me, what was that you were saying when you blessed the candle? You said something like, she looked at me, a graduate of law school, and said, I don't know. So I said, wait a minute. Then why are you doing it? And she said, my mother lit candles that way. My grandmother lit candles that way. This is where storytelling doesn't work. So I said, well, slow it down. And she says, Barich Shemeh. So that's a contraction of something we sing in the synagogue, traditional synagogues, Baruch atah Hashem, praised are you God. And the congregation is supposed to say, Baruch Hu u'Baruch Shemo. Praise is God and praise is God's name. I don't know about your synagogue. Mine, everyone's in a hurry. So it comes out Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. I was in one synagogue when I Baruch Shemo. I was in one in Minneapolis where everyone was going Shmo. They're talking about the rabbi, the cantor, the president, I don't know. So somewhere in this woman's tradition, and she was a young mom, she had done this brick shmay. Over the years, I mean, really, it started as a lovely tradition. Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Her bubby probably said Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, but it turned into brick shmay. So I tell the story in order for people to understand the power of story, because that's a story that tells volumes. So blessings and kisses, and figure out why you're saying what you're saying. And then tell your grandchildren.
I think my grandmother had the same mole.
She had the same mole?
Yeah. Maybe they all did. I don't know.
Mine did too. I think.
So that's the beginning of relationship building. That was your question.
Well, I actually I have a follow-up question for that, because in your book, The Best Boy in the United States, and by the way, your grandfather told me that was really your brother.
It was my brother.
Who is the best boy.
And my other brother.
That's right, the other brother. But you wrote in the book, little did I realize at the time that the traditions of my Zaidi and Bubi, our extended family, and my mom and dad would profoundly shape my worldview.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And clearly they have. But tell us a little bit about the worldview that has emerged from those traditions.
So I learned from my Zaidi, who was this grocer, that every human being is made in the image of God, and every customer who walked into a store, whatever their race, religion, or creed, or color, was treated that way. And that certainly shaped my worldview. My grandfather loved baseball, so he bought the box behind home plate. And the Omaha Cardinals was the AAA team. And he used to take us there. And then he loved wrestling matches. He would take us to the Omaha Civic Auditorium. I'm really focused in my worldview on giving this, my grandchildren don't live near us. So whenever we're together, I want to help create experiences with them that are memorable, that they will remember, because that's what I remember from my grandparents. And I think that that worldview has put me in good stead. They were great role models, family above everything, talking about telling stories. All 9 of us grandchildren were banished to the basement of Bubby and Zadie's house after a Passover Seder, so the adults, including my grandparents, could sit and tell stories over their Maxwell House coffee and their macaroons. And they would talk forever until Lori, the one girl in the group, ended up bleeding. And then the evening would end when she was taken to the emergency room for stitches, because all these boys would play a game called War, and Lori was the ball.
Oh,
so,
nice.
But I would watch them tell stories, and I realized that's another thing that's so powerful at family events, to shape the time so the stories can be told. And they're often very funny, and I remember them laughing hysterically. And, I don't know about in your family. My family, it was always phone calls. My mother used to do this, may she rest in peace. She used to call and tell she couldn't wait to hear the stories of our children. And I couldn't wait to hear her stories about her life and what was going on. So I think this notion of my worldview of the importance of stories is absolutely critical. And my colleagues here who know me for a few years, looking at Paul, know that whenever I teach, I tell stories. And I'll bet Marshall's the same way. You tell stories, you engage your audience, whether it's a group of people at a conference or it's your own grandchildren.